Good to go? All right, thanks. We'll go ahead and get started. Morning, everybody. My name is Micah. I'm an agriculture and natural resources extension educator based over in Johnson County. So I'm in the Buffalo office. I've been with Extension for almost 3 years now. Before that, I was a student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So that's where I did my college studies in animal science. Before that, I grew up on a farm ranch just outside Ogallala, Nebraska, kind of on the western side of the state, about 30 miles from the northeastmost point in Colorado. So not too terribly different from the eastern side of Wyoming, but you get out here, there's a lot more sagebrush than where I grew up. We've got kind of a small group this morning, and that's going to give us a little flexibility maybe to have a little more dialogue and conversation about some of these topics. If you wouldn't mind, we'll just go around the room quick, and if you would tell me where you're from and what your interest in being here today is, that would help me kind of tailor this a little bit to what questions you might have.
My name is Jean Armstrong. I live over in Lander. We run cows. It's a family deal.
Thank you.
Good morning, Joe Crops, Riverton. Why am I here? Lunch and listen to your seminar.
Great, thanks.
I'm Ash Corlett. I'm with Wyoming Honor Farm, supervise the beef cow program over there. I'm here because I want to understand more about breeding cows.
Sweet, thank you.
Jeremiah Vardaman up in Powell. We got 16 hens, so interested in just the rebreeding.
Okay, great, thanks. Dan?
Dan Vanderboot, and I'm from Borland, and I just wanted to do sheep, but I was interested in how the differences are.
Sure, awesome. Thank you for indulging me that. Here's kind of an outline of what I intend to talk about today. Focus a little bit on the estrus cycle, the anatomy, and the hormones that are involved in the estrus cycle. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the postpartum interval, so thinking about what happens between calving and when that female resumes cyclicity and is able to be bred back. This is going to be kind of the main focal point of the presentation. And then I'm going to take a little bit of a pivot towards the end and talk about some nutrition, because all of that ties back into reproductive success. Okay, just to start some things off here, I think it's important to have language well defined so that we can all communicate in the same way and be on the same page. So you might have noticed that in some places you'll see estrus written like this, and some places you'll see it written like this. Like on my previous slides, it had the O in there. So the difference is this one is a noun. This estrus is specifically that period of standing heat when that female is receptive to mating. So this one is very specifically standing heat. This one is an adjective, and so anytime we're talking about estrus cycles, this can be applied to cows and heifers. If you're talking about them, they're exhibiting estrus, you can say that they are an estrus cow or an estrus ewe, as that may be. So a little bit of semantics, but this is the difference, noun, adjective. All right, now we're really gonna jump into things. So what you're looking at right here is a cross-section of a cow's ovary. This is the gonad that derives reproduction in our bovine females, and we're gonna walk through all of these different structures that we're looking at, talk a little bit about when they're present, what their function is. So you can think of this as that ovary got cut in half, and that's what we're looking at here. So all of this is the vasculature and the innervation coming in. You can see that artery in red, the vein in blue. Kind of this yellow looking string is the nerves that are controlling all of the operations of the ovary. Now I want to be clear that not all of these structures are present all at the same time. This is just kind of for demonstration, and we can think of this as a progression through time, starting down here with the primary follicle and working our way around clockwise. So that's what we're going to do here. The very first thing is these primordial follicles. These little, the smallest size purple spots all the way through there. Those are the follicles that are present when that heifer calf hits the ground. When she is born, she has as many follicles, and each one of those contains an oocyte. That's that little bit darker spot in there. That's the female contribution in reproduction. So all of those are present when she's born. She's never going to have any more than she's got at that moment in time. And as she hits puberty, those follicles start to undergo the process of recruitment, where they grow a little bit. First, they'll be in this primary follicle stage, then secondary follicle stage, and there will actually be multiple follicles at the same time entering that recruitment, where they're growing in size a little bit and starting to develop. Eventually, they will start competing with each other to become the dominant follicle that eventually undergoes ovulation. So as we go, eventually one of those follicles will become dominant and will be large like this. And if you've ever seen an ovary on an ultrasound, if you had a cow at a vet or if you've had a horse at the vet and you're looking at the ovary, those are those big black spots that show up on the ultrasound. That's a fluid-filled structure getting really, really close to ovulation. Follicles that are not selected as the dominant follicle will undergo attrition, and they'll kind of fade away. And that's what all of these kind of tan, peach-colored structures are representing. Those are follicles that were not selected as the dominant follicle, and they kind of fade away, and they are no longer eligible for recruitment or ovulation. Jumping back to this dominant follicle, this one's large and in charge, and eventually will merge with the exterior of the ovary, and that oocyte will be ejected out of the ovary. So this is the actual moment of ovulation. So from this moment of ovulation all the way back to recruitment here, this entire phase of this process is dominated by estrogen. That's the hormone that is being produced by all of these structures in the ovary in this phase of the estrous cycle. And in a moment, on the next slide, we're going to look at some of those hormone profiles through time that will give a different way to visualize some of this information. But you can think all the way along the bottom here, estrogen dominated. Estrogen, or I might say estradiol sometimes too, that's marked as an E2 abbreviation. Estrogen, estradiol. From this point, the remaining tissue that was the inner membrane of this follicle undergoes reconstruction and turns into this structure called a corpus luteum. Luteum is Latin for yellow, corpus is body, yellow body, and this corpus luteum, or CL, really does look that yellow in color on the ovary. At this point, this oocyte is out, hopefully in the oviduct where it's running into some sperm that might be present in the system, and fertilization may or may not be occurring. But in the ovary, this CL is forming, and for the time being, it's going to produce progesterone for a period. And it's going to wait and see whether it gets a signal from the rest of the body that, yes, there is a conceptus present, fertilization took place, and that's now embedded in the uterus. We're going to keep this corpus luteum intact, keep producing progesterone, and we're going to start a pregnancy. Or the alternative is no conception occurred, there's nothing embedding in the uterus, and the uterus will start to produce prostaglandin F2 alpha. And that is the signal that this structure needs to go away, so it will lyse that CL in a process called luteolysis. You maybe are familiar if you've done some AI with luteolyse. That's the synthetic version of prostaglandin F2 alpha. We'll lyse that CL. It will retire into a corpus albicans and just kind of senesce and will hang out there in the ovary. Its functional time is over. So that's the end of the luteal phase, and then if there's no pregnancy detected, we'll start back over with follicular recruitment. We'll start getting some primary follicles forming. Eventually they'll compete again, and after a certain amount of time, ovulation will occur again. That is the quick overview of all of these structures that are present in the ovary. Does anybody know how long is the estrous cycle in a cow? 21 days? 21 days. You? Dan, what is it in a ewe? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, ewes. Yeah, it was in sheep. Sorry. I'm not trying to call anybody out.
Yeah, it's like 13 to 15.
For
between heat cycles, I don't know about that part, but if I miss, they're going to try and rebreed on 15 days.
And you use a synchronization protocol, probably.
First time I use a synchronization, but I don't try and resync them.
Okay.
If I miss, and then they get bred naturally.
Yeah. So there is some variation, but in the U it is generally around 21 days as well.
Oh.
Yeah. There's variation though on an individual level. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to scare anybody. I'm not trying to call you out in class. Hopefully you're not having flashbacks to a teacher you didn't like or something like that. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this? I'm going to flip to the next slide and we're going to look at some of those hormone profiles over time. But before we get into any of that, don't let this scare you too bad. We've got the follicular phase. Remember, that was all of those purple structures along the bottom as those follicles are being recruited. And then eventually, there is ovulation that occurs. I'm going to take a little bit of issue with this image. Ovulation actually happens shortly after this spike in LH, which is a different gonadotropin hormone. It's not, we're not going to go into that level of detail today. Then we see this luteal phase. Which one is longer? Follicular or luteal? This entire thing is the luteal phase. This is the follicular phase. And then it starts over again here. So the luteal phase is actually a little bit longer than the follicular phase. Now remember, all of those follicles coming on are producing estrogen, and that also contributes to that moment of ovulation. And then that corpus luteum, that yellow kind of spiky looking structure that was up there in the top right about here, is producing progesterone for the duration of the luteal phase. Now, if a pregnancy occurs and the body gets that signal, the ovary gets that signal, then that progesterone level would be sustained and cyclicity would cease until calving happens or until lambing happens, either way. In this case, we're not seeing any signal to indicate that there's been any kind of fertilization event. So progesterone's tapering off and we're getting everything prepped again for that estrogen to start to spike again, and we'll have another ovulation event. This is kind of the basic mechanics of the estrous cycle and how ovulation occurs. And I wanted to present some of this information to you because I think it will help in understanding what's going on immediately after calving from this hormone profile perspective. And I want you to keep this shape in mind, kind of. So we have this spike in estrogen and in LH, and then that tapers down. We have kind of a sustained curve of progesterone, and then if this graphic were to continue, we would have another spike of estrogen and LH, another ovulation event. So keep that kind of spike curve, spike image in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to that in a moment. I decided not to go into all of the hormone details that happen around calving. There are lots of other things going on in the body of the cow at that point. There's a lot of oxytocin involved in contractions and milk letdown. Prolactin is also pretty involved in that process. But those are fairly outside the scope of truly the estrous cycle and what's going on there. So we're going to leave that be for the time being. Now we're looking at kind of a very similar profile of hormone concentrations. This one's only showing us estrogen and progesterone. This is where calving has occurred, and we're entering into this period of anovulatory anestrus. So when we put that prefix "an" in front of a word, that means not happening, none. So there's no estrus, and this is RUS estrus, so there's no standing heat happening at this point, and ovulatory. There's no ovulation happening at this point. So that cow has just gone through a lot of trauma in her reproductive tract, getting that calf onto the ground. So she's got to take some time to focus on her uterine health. She's also coming into milk letdown, and that's pretty demanding on her energy. So reproduction is not a high priority immediately after calving. There's a period of time where there's no estrus, there's no ovulation occurring. After a certain amount of time, and we're going to talk about how long that is in a little while, there will be a silent ovulation. What I mean by that is there will be a spike in estrogen that causes an ovulation, but it does not occur simultaneously with the standing heat. So she's going to ovulate, but she's not going to show that that happened. She's probably not going to get bred at that point if there is a bull around. There's a short luteal phase, and then there is a true standing heat. And so what the literature has suggested is this is a loss of an oocyte, right? Because we're not going to get that one back if it's not coming into contact with any sperm in the reproductive tract and inducing a pregnancy. But this little bump in progesterone actually kind of helps rewire some of the systems in the brain that manage this entire hormone system, from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland down to the gonads. And so the real significance, we think, is that progesterone kind of reprimed the system for regular estrus to resume. So we get a standing heat, and then do you recognize this shape that we talked about just a moment ago? We got the spike, the curve, and the spike. So it takes a little while after calving, but eventually things get going again, and we are back into regular estrus cyclicity. Questions about this before I move on? Slow me down if I'm going too fast through some of this stuff. Okay, so why does any of this matter? Why do you care? Really, maintaining a calving interval of 365 days is your ideal, because the longer it takes your female to get rebred, the lighter those calves are going to be each time you go to sell them in the fall, to the point that that cow maybe is breeding or coming into cyclicity late enough that it's at the very end of your breeding period, or she's completely missed it. And when the bulls were in, she was not cycling. And then she falls out of the herd because she comes up open when you preg check. So, if you have a smartphone, I'm going to ask you to get it out, find your calculator app. We're going to work through some math together. And if you don't, you can use a paper and pen. It's not hard math, I promise. All right. So we have our ideal calving interval is 365 days. You want her to calve on the same day every year in an ideal world.
That don't happen.
That don't happen, no. The average gestation length in a cow is 283 days. There is some variation there, but on average, 283 days. So let's subtract that from 365, and what does that give you? 82. So you have 82 days from the time she drops that calf to get her bred back and maintain your 365-day calving interval. Now, we just talked about there's a period of anestrus when she's not cycling and she's not experiencing standing heat. So do you really have 82 days? No, you don't really have 82 days, because there's at least some portion of that 82 days where she is not able to conceive. Yeah?
Generally 6 weeks?
Yes, we're going to get to that on the next slide. So, because of that post-calving anestrus period, I looked through the literature, and this is what I could find. On average, best case scenario, 20 days is the shortest typical postpartum interval. So that's, when I say postpartum interval, I mean from when she's calved to when she starts cycling again. So,
What conditions?
what's that?
What conditions? 20 days. Is that a young cow, optimal feed, moderate climate? What conditions?
Yes, all of those things. Maybe I would actually push back against the young cow.
Okay.
We're going to get to that in just a little bit. And we'll talk about some of those things, especially on the nutrition side of things. Yeah. What does this give you? You can do that one in your head probably. 62 days. 62-day breeding period under like ideal best case scenario. Now the literature suggests that probably toward the longer end, 40-day postpartum interval gives you 42 days, right? All right, I have one more slide of math, and then we can put the calculators away for a little bit. So if we're assuming a 21-day cycle, this gives you how many estrus cycles?
almost 3.
Almost 3, right? This one is also, you can do in your head probably. 2, right? So if these conditions are ideal, and we're going to get into those conditions here in a little bit, you've got almost 1 entire additional estrus cycle to get her bred back and still maintain that 365-day calving. And I touched on this a little bit already, but here we're looking at, on the top, 60-day breeding period. This is a cow that breeds early in that 60-day breeding period. She will then calve early in the calving period and resume estrus cyclicity for almost the entire breeding period again the next year. Down here, if she breeds late in that 60-day breeding period, then she'll calve late and may or may not be cycling when the bull is in there. All of this is assuming natural service mating. If you're doing AI, then you're manipulating some of these things, and you've got a little bit more control over some of this. There's some evidence to suggest that using cedars can help kind of jumpstart that cyclicity immediately after calving and help kind of push that back towards the more ideal conditions on the previous slide, more towards this relative to 42 days recovery. So there are management tools available if you're using some of the AI and more intensively managed reproductive technologies. Okay. So now this is the moment where we're going to pivot more into the nutrition portion of this presentation and think about how our management of nutrition of the cow, both before and after calving, has pretty significant influence on estrus and rebreeding success. So forgive me, I am not a nutritionist. I studied physiology, but we're going to jump into some of this a little bit. Gross energy is everything that cow eats. Not all of that is able to be used. Some of it comes out the back end, right? So there's a little bit of loss there. What we're left with is digestible energy. Again, some of that is lost in the form of gas, what gets breathed out or burped out of the rumen. Some of it's lost in the urine, and we're down to metabolizable energy. And this is energy from that diet, what gets consumed that is able to be burned in the animal. Some of it is lost as heat, some of it goes towards actual productive function. And we're going to focus on maintenance, growth, lactation, and then pregnancy or reproduction. This whole model, partitioning energy, is very academic, and you will probably not, you might see some of these net energy values on a hay test if you sample your hay. It is more common to see TDN, or for producers to work in terms of TDN versus net energy, unless you're really, really into the nutrition, like on a highly managed feedlot diet or a dairy ration or something like that. But I just wanted to use this whole thing to illustrate that just because she's eating it does not mean that it's necessarily being used completely efficiently. There are losses throughout the system. I also wanted to throw out, I have 2 lovely colleagues that work with the Ag Extension team. This is McKenna Julian and Dagan Montgomery. They're both trained nutritionists. They're both here today presenting in the other room. That's why I put their faces up here, because I knew they wouldn't be in here. If you have nutrition questions, these are the folks to ask. They have a lot better grasp on all of this than I do personally. Okay, so we're gonna think specifically about net energy. That's this value down here at the bottom: maintenance, growth, lactation, and I'm gonna add pregnancy into this. And the way I like to think about it is, you have this feed energy coming into your animal. It's gonna fill this first bucket that is maintenance first, before it fills anything else downstream. So when I say maintenance, think about the respiration that happens. Just you don't think about it. The cow doesn't think about it. It just happens. All of the digestive processes that occur without any active thought. This is also going to be related to energy that's expended while she's out grazing or when she's out at the feed bunk and walking back and forth to the tank. All of those things fall under maintenance. This is keeping that animal alive, like bare minimum. After the maintenance requirements are met, then we'll start pouring into growth. And this is where the conversation comes in really important, thinking about our first calf heifers and our second calf heifers actually. Animals that have not reached their mature body size yet, that still have energy demands to grow their physical mass. They're accumulating tissues. It takes a lot of energy to build bone and muscle and those organs as they continue to grow in their capacity as well. So maintenance and then growth, thinking about growth especially for our younger females. After that, lactation. So again, a second calf heifer that has just calved or has just had her first calf will be coming into second calf. She's still growing, she's milking for the first time, all of that mammary tissue is under development. She's trying to keep her calf going. This peaks 60 to 80 days after calving. What else happens 60 to 80 days after calving? Yes. We're trying to get her back into cyclicity and get her rebred to maintain our 365-day calving. At the very bottom of this whole thing is pregnancy. Reproduction is not a high priority in terms of this net energy system. That's not to say that you won't be able to get a female bred, but the priority and partitioning that takes place in her body is going to do maintenance first, then growth, lactation, pregnancy. So if one of these is going to be cut, or one of these needs is going to go unmet, likely pregnancy will be the first one to fall. And then whatever's left afterwards comes out the back end. We talked about that already. Okay, so what can you do with all of that information? A lot of this has been very molecular, very theoretical up to this point, so I'm going to try to make this a little more applied from here to the end. We're going to do a little pop quiz. Which cow will likely have a shorter postpartum interval? So which one will come back into cyclicity more quickly after calving? I'll give you two options, A or B. What was that? B? B. Why?
She's got the body condition.
She's got the body condition. Yes. So these are examples. Actually, I'm going to ask you another question on this. Throw out a guess. From 1 to 9, which body condition are we going to rate her at? 4?
Can't see the ribs, but you should.
4-ish? 5?
Maybe.
Like 4.5, 5 maybe? You guys are good. This is from the University of Nebraska standards. And this is their BCS 5. This is their 3. So we would expect that because this cow has more fat deposits that she can draw on, she is probably going to have a shorter postpartum interval. Something else I didn't really go into detail on, I didn't know how much to put in there, but peak lactation occurs 60 to 80 days after calving, and typically, whether that cow looks like this or looks like this, she's going to enter into a negative energy balance. And so what that means is she's expending more energy in terms of nursing that calf at side, recovering her reproductive organ structures, getting herself kind of back on track, than she can physically eat at that point in time. And that will eventually diminish as nursing demands decrease, forage comes on, higher quality, fresh grass is always a good thing. But no matter what, these cows are both going to enter that negative energy balance. And so this one is positioned better to take that and get through it than this one here. Okay, next question. Which cow likely has a greater risk for dystocia or issues calving, hard pull?
The thin, weaker cow.
The what?
Thinner, weaker cow.
The thinner and weaker cow? Why do you say that?
She doesn't have the musculature to push.
She doesn't? Okay, that could be true. Yeah, that could be true for sure. because it does take a lot of energy for those contractions to occur and that birth process to take place. I'm going to make a different point here, but you're right. So here's A and here's B. A, why? Too fat. Too fat. Yep, so here we've got this is our body condition score, 5 again. What number are we going to give her? 7. Yep, 7. She will be at greater risk for a harder pull because she's got too much fat and there's not as much room for things to move around as that calf is working its way out. So I make this point to say there is a limit where you hit too much condition and then you start running into other problems. Okay. Body condition scoring should ideally be done mid and late gestation and throughout the breeding season. Which one of these is going to be cheaper to add condition onto that female? Thinking about energy demands on her at these 2 different points in time. Here, let's assume that she is no longer milking, so that calf is weaned and she's dry. And here, let's assume that she's got a calf at side, she's maybe entering into peak lactation, that net energy balance that occurs during, or negative energy balance that occurs during peak lactation. Where is it going to be more economical to add some groceries? The first one, right? And so this is really a key point in your production year when you need to be conducting body condition scoring. And if there's some that need a little bit of extra help, throw a supplement to them. At this point in the year, our native range is pretty dried down. It might have the energy requirement, the TDN or that net energy, but chances are the protein has dipped below what's required to keep her going. So if you could throw some protein supplement out there, if you have your hay tested and you know those values and you can really get that dialed in and target supplementation in a way that's going to benefit the animals that are hurting, maybe those body condition score 3, 4 cows that are out there, heifers body condition score 4 or 5 that might need a little bit of extra to keep them going, that's the time to do it. You can accomplish the same thing here, but it's going to be way more expensive and it's going to take a lot more to get to the same result. Here's the targets. BCS 5 for mature cows, BCS 6 for heifers, because why? Why is this one higher?
They need the extra energy for growing during the same.
They need that extra energy because they're still trying to grow their frame size to their mature body size. Yeah, exactly. Keep records of your body condition score. Even if you only take the time and energy to do a sub-sample out of your entire herd, maybe that's, you figure how many it would take to hit 1/3 of your animals that you score, or half, and then you don't worry about it for the other half. Get some kind of data down because you can't manage what you don't measure. If you have no idea what the average body condition score is of your herd, then you have no idea whether or not you need to be supplementing, or if supplementing is an extra expense that you don't need to be making in a given year. Maybe it was a really good forage year and your animals are already here, then there's no need to supplement. This is one of the biggest take-home messages I have for you today, is measure things, write it down somewhere that you'll be able to get back to it, and keep track of that from year to year. Okay, now we're going to get into some more complicated nutrition stuff. Again, if you have questions about what all of these mean, I threw my colleagues under the bus earlier. Go find them and ask them your questions. Here's what we're going to talk about. These are TDN requirement. Well, we're going to focus on the TDN requirement, but these are some different metrics for our cows gestating, middle third of pregnancy, down here, last third of pregnancy. I pulled this data from Oklahoma State University Extension, nutrition requirements for beef cattle. And we're going to focus in just on our 1,200 pound mature cow, I chose that arbitrarily because I figured that might be close-ish to what some of the folks in the room might average in their herd. We're going to ignore this column. We'll take a look at this one. At this point, mid-gestation, she's expected to be consuming 21.4 pounds per day of dry matter basis forage. Here's our two energy values. So TDN is a little more accessible because it's given in terms of pounds. Net energy for maintenance. Megacalories. What's a megacalorie? I don't know. We're going to ignore that for now. Pounds. Pounds of TDN. 10.7 pounds of TDN. And this is something, if you're testing your hay, you will know how many pounds of TDN or what percentage of TDN and you can get there. Protein requirement is another important one. 1.6 pounds of protein, mid-gestation. Now we're going to jump down, look at that same body size, mature size animal in the last trimester. During the last trimester, that's the bulk of fetal growth. That calf is really growing and bulking up to its birth size. Her intake has gone up 23.9 pounds. Energy's gone up to 13 pounds of TDN. Protein jumped up a little bit to 1.8. Okay? So all of this is during gestation. Mid-gestation, late gestation. And if you're curious to take a look at this publication, or if you want to look at different animal sizes, different production metrics, let me know. I can send you a copy of this. We're looking at the same thing here now, but it's the lactating cow, first 90 days after calving. So we're assuming that that peak lactation is occurring within this window. And they've split out each of our mature weights into 3 different peak milk production values. And so one thing that I haven't touched on yet that does influence postpartum interval is your genetics and how heavy of a milker you've got. If she's a pretty light milker, she needs less energy than if she's a heavy milker. She needs less crude protein than if she's a heavy milker. And that's where, as you were attending bull sales this time of year, if you retain your own females, looking at that maternal milk, EPD, or whatever its equivalent is in the breed that you're buying from, that will help inform whether the daughters of that bull are going to be lighter milkers or heavier milkers. And those are things to keep in mind as you're starting to think about what kind of nutrition are those heifers that you retain going to need to be able to breed back effectively. Again, we're coming back to maintaining that 365-day calving. Does this make sense? All right, I plugged forage testing already. This is a really handy trifold that my colleague Dagan produced. And he does a really great job in this, breaking down what the different values are that you're going to get on your hay test report. So take a look at this. I have plenty more if you'd like a couple copies. If you know somebody that might like to take a look at that, you're welcome to help yourself. But again, forage testing, you can't manage what you don't measure. And if you call your extension office with the question about nutrition for your cow herd, they're more than likely going to ask you first, well, have you had your hay tested? What are we working with? Because we got to know that before we can make any recommendations on how to move forward from there. This is a really, really good investment in your management of your operation. All right, we're getting down to the bottom of our time, and I want to leave a little bit for questions. So here are the big takeaways. Length of postpartum interval will affect rebreeding success, and the value of your calf crop, because the earlier that calf is born, the heavier it'll be in the fall when you go to sell or market. Energy demand, matching energy demand with forage and nutrition, whether that's hay, whether that's a supplement that you got to kick to them, some cake or grain, or whatever it takes to get them into the appropriate body condition score ahead of calving, will improve reproductive function the following season. And finally, measure and record as much data as you want or can. Body condition score is a big one. Forage quality is also a big one to track. In the big picture of making sure nutrition is supporting reproductive success. I wanted to take a brief moment to plug the Beef Reproduction Task Force. We have a fantastic beef specialist in our extension system, Dr. Shelby Rosasco. She's very involved in the Beef Reproduction Task Force. They have a couple tools on their website. This QR code will take you to that website. Estrous Synchronization Planner, if you use some of those assisted reproductive technologies, and then an AI calculator that's actually pretty handy. You put in what protocol you're using and the target dates you want, and it spits out all of the time points for the different administrations of that protocol. They do a really great webinar series January through June, so that is ongoing. And you can register for the webinars at this link. And then also they have an in-person conference every fall. This fall it will be September 17th to 18th in North Platte, Nebraska. That sounds like a long ways from here, but it was in Georgia last year. So this one is at least within driving distance. It was in Cheyenne 2 years ago, and I attended that one. It was fantastic. So if you have questions about beef reproduction or really like digging into some of the what the academics are studying in this area right now, I would highly recommend attending that meeting. Throwing this up here, this morning I'm coming to you from Johnson County, where we dealt with a lot of anxiety and stress and grief around the wildfire season last year. And we are in Wyoming, we are in agriculture, we are, a lot of us, older males, and those are all risk factors that put us into kind of some dangerous situations sometimes. I'm also putting this up here because if you know somebody that's not willing to call for themselves, you can call this number for free. The Ag Stress folks are trained in agriculture. They work in agriculture. And if you want help trying to figure out how to support your friends and neighbors that might be experiencing some stress, you're welcome to call this number as well. This is the crisis intervention number 2. I'm going to throw it out there. That is everything I have for you today. I appreciate your attention. Happy to answer any questions. I get really excited talking about the cellular, molecular stuff, but I know that really doesn't matter day to day. So I tried to calm myself down out of the clouds a little bit and give you some take-home tools that you'll be able to use. Questions? Must have answered them all. Good. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Oh, I do think, am I supposed to pass out this evaluation? If you've already filled out 7 evaluations, here's one more. I should have passed these out while I was talking.
Glad I checked, Micah, because I stole your.
Oh, geez. I wondered, is this yours over here?
I guess.
Okay, I saw that and I was like, that's
Well,
somebody.
my coat was there, so I just grabbed my coat in the bag. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, Society for Range Management. Why is that in my bag? So one of the things, and I don't know, this will only be when it's super important. One of the things I found in your sheet is it's not just the energy requirement, but specifically if you're growing corn, the corn makes their urine run hotter, makes their body run hotter, makes them less likely to get pregnant, makes them less, makes them more hostile to sperm.
That makes sense to me because their seasons. I was going to talk about that. I did.
Well, I didn't think it would matter.
Environmental stress can also factor into
Right. Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Especially if you're trying to breed early for your
right. It's already
when it's
hot.
already hot.
Yeah.
in the day. It's still
Yeah, because they are The photograph affects them pretty strongly, yeah. And then,
One more and then we get.
oh, and then
One more and we get lunch.
also the,
Like this is the red one. And I was anyway out for sheep negotiating. She's with fat Geez, we ought to be good at that by now.
yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, just, thanks.
I wanna see what they
I
got
have
up
nothing
their
to do with
sleeve.
it, but I just,
Yeah, that's really interesting.